She thought she was towing an eyesore off her precious street. What she didn't know was that the truck she stole had 2 encrypted hard drives, 3 hidden cameras, and classified surveillance equipment tied to a federal racketeering case, one that had her name in the evidence file. And the cherry on top? The guy she bragged about putting in his place? I'm the federal prosecutor leading the case against her entire HOA board. When I moved into the neighborhood, I wasn't looking for drama. I just wrapped up a 2-year case involving white-collar criminals who smiled for the cameras while stealing millions, and I needed quiet, maybe even a few nights without reviewing affidavits or listening to wiretap. The house I found was tucked into a sleepy gated community outside the city. It was the kind of place where lawns were surgically trimmed, flags hung straight, and everyone smiled a little too hard. It came with an HOA, which I figured was a small price to pay for peace. I was wrong. On my second day in the house, I met Karen. She arrived like a politician on a campaign trail, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, and a smile that twitched at the edges. She walked straight past the "Do Not Disturb" sign I'd taped to my gate and rang the bell 3 times in a row, like she was timing my response. I opened the door mid-chew, holding a half-eaten sandwich and wearing gym shorts. Her eyes scanned me like a barcode. "Hi there. I'm Karen, president of the HOA. I noticed your truck out front and just wanted to give you a heads up. It violates several of our appearance guidelines." I blinked. Appearance guidelines? She flipped a laminated packet open like she was reading me my rights. Section 4B of the HOA Code states that all visible vehicles must be either garaged or conform to aesthetic standard. That includes no visible rust, aftermarket decals, or commercial attachments. I didn't say anything for a moment, because the truck she was talking about wasn't just a truck. It was a blacked-out surveillance vehicle equipped with encrypted GPS, heat-sensing panels, and a reinforced data vault in the bed, federal property. Sure, it looked a little rough, but that's part of the point. A spy truck doesn't work if it looks like something out of a James Bond film. "I'm not sure that applies," I said calmly. "That vehicle's government-owned." Her smile didn't even twitch. "Well, government or not, the HOA rules still apply in this neighborhood. I'm sure you'll understand." She handed me a pink violation notice like she was handing out flyers for a garage sale. Then she turned on her heel and walked off my property like she owned the street. I should have shut it down right then and there. Flashed my badge. Told her who I was and what kind of trouble she was inviting into her life. But I didn't. See, sometimes in my line of work, it pays to let people talk. Because when people think you're nobody, they show you everything. Over the next week, Karen escalated. Every morning I'd find a new violation notice, taped to my door, slipped under my windshield wiper, or folded into my mailbox. Unapproved window tinting. Mailbox slightly off-center. Truck remains in public view. One time she fined me for having a hose coiled, too irregularly, on its hanger. I ignored most of it, but I made note. Every contact, every complaint, every attempt to intimidate. Because even though I'd bought the house as a temporary base during an ongoing investigation, something about Karen set off alarms louder than any siren. It wasn't just her control issues, it was how she moved. Like someone who was covering tracks. Like someone who needed everything just so because underneath it all was a mess she couldn't let anyone see. Then came the day I returned from a 3-day assignment out of town. I pulled up to my driveway, remote in hand, expecting the gate to open like usual. But the gate wasn't there. The chain had been cut clean through. The lock, federal issue, was in pieces on the ground, as if someone had taken bolt cutters to it and just left the evidence in plain sight. My first thought was burglary. But the house was untouched. Doors locked. Cameras blinking. No signs of forced entry. It was the driveway that was empty. The truck was gone. I checked with the police first. No impound. No tow log. Then I checked the HOA portal. There it was. A smug little note posted by Karen herself in the Community Compliance section. Truck at 314 Maple was removed after 72 hours of non-compliance. Vehicle was deemed an eyesore and a safety risk. Owner was warned repeatedly. Removal authorized by HOA president. She signed it like a mayor signing a new city ordinance. I stared at that post for a full minute. Then I started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. The sheer audacity. The level of stupidity. She had cut a federal law. Trespassed on private property. Towed government equipment. All while documenting it like it was a bake sale flyer. That truck didn't just have surveillance hardware. It had active case materials inside, materials tied to a RICO case I'd been building for over a year. Evidence related to property fraud, embezzlement, illegal kickbacks, and more. A case involving multiple suspects, including a certain HOA board under quiet federal review. And now, thanks to Karen's obsession with her fantasy fiefdom, she'd handed me probable cause gift wrapped in a pink HOA violation slip. I could have picked up the phone and ended her story that day. But like I said before, sometimes it pays to let people talk. Karen had just opened a door she wouldn't be able to close. And me? I was going to walk right through it. Karen didn't know it yet, but the clock had already started ticking. Every move she made from the moment she had my truck towed without authority was another link in the chain tightening around her neck. The woman had cracked open a federal case she didn't even know existed, and she did it while bragging about it on an HOA forum. That's the thing about people like her. So consumed with power they don't stop to ask if they're actually holding a live wire. I began with the basics. Calm. Quiet. Invisible. I filed a public inquiry through a burner email asking for documentation regarding the truck's removal. The HOA's response was predictably smug. They sent over a PDF with Karen's digital signature authorizing the action. No warning, no due process, just a bold claim that the vehicle had been abandoned and posed a visual threat to neighborhood harmony. I chuckled at that one. Only Karen could make a parked truck sound like a home invasion. Meanwhile, I paid a visit to the tow company listed in the report, Gibson's Auto Recovery. A dusty lot on the edge of town with a tin roof office and a pair of mechanics arguing about barbecue sauce out front. I walked in dressed in jeans and a faded baseball cap, playing the part of a frustrated homeowner. The owner, a balding guy named Cliff with a beer gut and a Bluetooth headset, remembered the tow instantly. "Oh yeah, that one," he said, scratching his neck. "Lady was real pushy. Showed up with papers and everything. Said the truck was blocking a fire lane." I raised an eyebrow. Fire lane? It was in a gated driveway. Cliff shrugged. "Look, man, she said she was with the HOA. Had that whole official vibe, you know? Waved a clipboard, threw around words like non-compliance and neighborhood safety. Paid cash too. Never seen that before. That little detail lit up like a Christmas tree. Cash? HOAs don't pay cash. They invoice. They document. They leave paper trails thicker than a phone book. But Karen had paid off the books, directly from HOA emergency funds, as I would soon confirm. That kind of transaction screamed personal. She wasn't acting as a representative. She was acting on a grudge. I asked if I could see where the truck had been kept. Cliff was reluctant until I mentioned liability and made some vague references to legal action. He led me to a fenced-off section in the back, where the surveillance truck had been dumped like a rusted-out lawn ornament. It was dirty, dented, and worse for wear, but everything was intact. I unlocked the panel inside the bed, opened the hidden compartment, and did a quick scan. The drive was still mounted. The decoy files untouched. Cameras undisturbed. She had no idea what she was dealing with. Back at home, I got to work. I pulled all the HOA's financial filings, public documents, conveniently filed through the county's online portal. On paper, everything looked clean. But clean paper doesn't mean clean hands. I dove into the beautification committee Karen was always pushing. Tens of thousands of dollars were being funneled into it annually, with vague notations like landscaping upgrades, decorative maintenance, and community revitalization. It would have passed casual inspection. But I wasn't casual. I cross-referenced every listed vendor with state business record. That's when I found the first ghost company, Bloom and Blossom Design. Supposedly a landscaping firm paid $9,200 last quarter for entryway enhancements. Except the company didn't exist. No tax ID. No business license. No phone number. Just a P.O. box and a single bank routing number that traced to a credit union in another state. Things were getting spicy. I submitted a quiet financial subpoena under a joint task force provision. A few clicks later, I had transaction data linking Bloom and Blossom's bank account to multiple deposits, all of them traced back to the HOA's general fund. Then those funds were funneled elsewhere, to a private account in Karen's name, one in the treasurer's, and another belonging to the HOA vice president. Embezzlement. Fraud. Maybe even conspiracy if I kept digging. And I wasn't done yet. I created a fake identity. Mr. Leonard Cross, a real estate investor looking to develop a row of boutique homes just outside the neighborhood. I had a fake email, burner number, LinkedIn profile, the works. Then I reached out to Karen, posing as a man interested in building nearby but needing flexibility with HOA codes. She responded in less than 10 minutes, practically salivating. We scheduled a coffee meeting at a local cafe. I dressed the part, expensive watch, clean suit, just the right amount of fake charm. Karen showed up wearing a pearl necklace and a smug grin like she was walking into a power lunch. I let her talk. She boasted about her influence, how easily she could sway the board, how much she hated how restrictive the rules were when she first moved in. All bark, no bite until I got involved, she said, sipping her low-fat soy latte. Now we get things done. You want to bend the rules? I'm your girl. Everything has a price, Leonard. I smiled. And what's the price of convenience these days? She leaned in, voice low. 10 grand up front. Nothing traceable. I'll get you whatever variances you need. Boom. Bribery in broad daylight. She didn't even flinch. After the meeting, I returned to my house and reviewed the dashcam from the truck. I'd set it up months ago to test a new motion sensor module. When I checked the time-stamped footage from the day she had the vehicle towed, I nearly laughed out loud. Karen had walked up to the gate with bolt cutters in broad daylight, glanced around twice, and then snapped the lock like she was clipping a stubborn branch. She even tossed her hair afterward, like she was proud of it. The audio picked up everything. Her phone call to the tow company, her rant about setting an example, even her parting words. Let him call the cops. I am the cops around here. That was the final piece I needed. I forwarded the footage and all supporting documentation to the lead agent in our federal task force. The message was short. Looks like our case just got personal. Karen still had no idea who I really was. She still thought I was just a stubborn homeowner who couldn't follow the rules. But soon enough, she was going to find out that the man she'd tried to humiliate was the very person prosecuting her crooked empire. The game was officially on. I could have arrested Karen right then and there, but I wasn't after a quick win. I was building a case with layers, one that would not only take her down but unravel the entire web of corruption strangling the neighborhood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about letting her own arrogance carve the path straight to her downfall. And all I had to do was nudge her in the right direction and hit record. The neighborhood had a private Facebook group where only residents and HOA board members were allowed. I had already created a burner account for Leonard Cross, but now I needed something even lower profile. So I became Sarah Withers, recently divorced mother of 2, new to the neighborhood, and just looking to feel involved. Within hours of requesting access, I was approved and welcomed by a flood of flower emojis and passive-aggressive encouragements to read the community rules. Karen herself left a comment. Welcome to the best-run HOA in the county. You'll love it here. The irony was almost poetic. From the moment I got in, it was like watching a suburban soap opera unfold in real time. Residents were frustrated, complaining about fines for things like leaving trash bins out 20 minutes past pickup or failing to power wash their fences. But every time someone spoke out, Karen swooped in with a comment that sounded friendly but dripped with condescension. "We all have to do our part to maintain standards," or "Please remember that harmony begins with compliance." I watched as people slowly stopped commenting, clearly worn down by her cheerfully authoritarian nonsense. It wasn't long before someone posted a blurry photo of a newly planted flower bed near the clubhouse. The caption read, "Another lovely upgrade courtesy of our beautification team. Great job, Karen." The flowers were cheap, wilted, and clearly store-bought. Yet the post was flooded with praise, all from the same 5 names, every one of them tied to the HOA board. A coordinated propaganda machine. But one comment caught my attention. It was from an older man named Bill, who simply wrote, "How come I saw those same flowers in your trunk last week, Karen?" The comment vanished within an hour. When I checked Bill's profile the next morning, it had been removed from the group. That was my in. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. These weren't private. Technically any resident could sit in, though they were always held at odd hours to discourage attendance. This one was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I showed up in business casual, blending in perfectly with the retirees and remote workers sipping from branded coffee cup. The room was small, sterile, and overly air-conditioned. Karen sat at the head of the table, wearing a blazer like she was about to host a press conference. The meeting began with a roll call and a speech about community pride. I sat silently in the second row, waiting. Then, about 20 minutes in, the treasurer mentioned the budget for upcoming maintenance enhancements. The number? $32,000. Karen nodded along, adding that contractors had already been selected. That was my cue. I raised my hand. Karen blinked, clearly surprised that anyone outside the board was even paying attention. "Yes, Sarah, right?" I smiled. "Just curious, who were the contractors hired for the enhancements?" She hesitated. "Local vendors. All vetted, of course." "Do we have names?" I asked, still smiling. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "The details will be published in next quarter's report." "But the funds are being spent now?" I asked. "Shouldn't residents be able to review who's getting the contracts we're paying for?" Someone in the back actually clapped once before realizing no one else was joining in. Karen recovered quickly. "Transparency is very important to us. I assure you, all vendors meet our standards." I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. That was all I needed. That little hesitation. That flicker. She knew I was a problem now, even if she still didn't know who I really was. What she didn't realize was that I'd already subpoenaed the HOA's banking records under federal authority. The beautification fund wasn't just full of ghost vendors, it was a shell game. Karen's boyfriend, listed as consultant, had been paid $12,000 for something called Gate Aesthetics Consulting. Another $7,500 had gone to a landscaping company that shared a mailing address with the HOA vice president's cousin. And the clincher? Multiple deposits into a private PayPal account under the name KL Management, an account tied directly to Karen's personal email. It was time to take things up a notch. We executed a quiet search warrant, using a mobile tech van to scan Karen's home office from the street. The scan detected a private server in her house, unusual for someone claiming to be a volunteer administrator. The next day we had eyes inside, courtesy of a utility repair team who accidentally clipped the water main and were required to inspect HOA irrigation lines. While 2 guys checked the sprinkler system, another agent installed a data repeater that let us access her internal emails. That's when it all blew open. Karen had been running a side hustle using her HOA access to target homeowners. People who fell behind on dues or racked up multiple violations were being offered payment plans that redirected funds into her personal account. And it wasn't just about money. There were emails where she referred to residents as pigs, trailer trash, and wannabes. She even made fun of one woman for having a disabled son, saying she was playing the sympathy card for lawn exceptions. That was the moment I stopped feeling even a shred of restraint. We'd gathered enough evidence to charge her, but I wasn't done. I wanted her exposed in the court of public opinion first. So I arranged for a controlled leak. A few screenshots of her internal emails, a couple transaction summaries, and one particularly damning message about destroying any non-compliant files, were sent anonymously to a local journalist who'd been covering HOA abuse cases for years. Within 48 hours, the story hit the front page of the Metro section. HOA president under investigation for fraud, abuse of power. Karen went ballistic. She blamed everyone, board members, residents, even the local printer who handled the newsletters. She held an emergency HOA meeting trying to clear the air. I attended that one too, sitting in the back as she sweat through her blouse and stammered about misunderstandings and fabricated documents. But it was too late. The residents had tasted the truth, and for the first time in years, they realized they didn't have to fear her anymore. The kingpin of the cul-de-sac was cracking, and I wasn't done tightening the screws. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal professionals, but with residents from the neighborhood, reporters with notepads, even a few bored law students who probably thought they were about to watch a routine fraud case. They had no idea. What they were about to witness was the implosion of a woman who had ruled her gated community like a miniature dictator and finally walked headfirst into the one system more controlling than she was, the federal justice system. And I was standing at the front of it, tie straightened, files in hand, watching Karen shuffle in like a middle schooler called to the principal's office, trying to look dignified with handcuffs on. Karen had somehow convinced herself that her little kingdom would protect her. She had hired an off-brand defense attorney she found on Craigslist, a man named Brent who wore a tan suit 2 sizes too big and insisted on calling the judge Your Excellence. He opened his argument with the claim that the HOA was a sovereign entity, not subject to federal overreach. The judge blinked, sighed, and made a note before giving me a look that said, "Let's just get through this circus." I didn't even need to go nuclear. I started simple, methodical. I laid out the financial record. Vendor payouts with no legitimate business registration. Deposits into personal account. Fake invoices with identical formatting to the HOA's letterhead. By the time I introduced the recordings, Karen's own voice bragging about removing vehicles, manipulating fines, and, most damningly, describing residents in foul, elitist language, the jury wasn't just paying attention. They were leaning forward. Then came the video. I had waited for just the right moment. The lights dimmed, and the screen lit up with high-resolution footage from the surveillance truck. There she was, bolt cutters in hand, pacing in front of the gate like she was weighing whether to commit a felony or bake cookies. She snapped the lock, laughed to herself, and called the tow company saying, "I don't care who owns it. I'm tired of his attitude." She looked pleased. Powerful. Completely unaware that the truck was watching her right back. When the video ended, you could hear a pin drop. Karen was pale, her lawyer stammering something about context and overzealous enforcement. Then the witnesses started talking. The former treasurer was the first to flip. He walked in with trembling hands and eyes glued to the floor. He'd made a deal to reduce his sentence, and he sang like a jukebox. He explained how Karen had forced him to falsify documents, threatening to have him removed from the board if he didn't comply. He admitted to withdrawing cash from HOA accounts and handing it directly to her in white envelope. He wasn't proud, but he was thorough. Next came the vice president, who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her testimony was even more damning. She broke down crying midway through, admitting that Karen had promised her a cut of the landscaping funds if she stayed quiet. When asked why she went along with it, she whispered, because she said no one would ever stop her. That she had people in her pocket. That even if someone tried, she'd ruin their life. I could feel the jury absorbing every word. No amount of HOA jargon or spreadsheets could undo the damage Karen had done to herself with sheer arrogance. She didn't just steal money, she created an environment of fear, manipulation, and retaliation. And now that environment was turning against her. Karen finally took the stand, against the advice of her cartoonishly unqualified lawyer. Her confidence was cracked but not entirely gone. She tried to spin the story, claiming everything was a misunderstanding, a smear campaign by disgruntled board members. She even turned toward the jury, tears brimming in her eyes, and said, "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful." That's when I stood up. I asked one question. Is that why you called your residence suburban livestock in an email about law enforcement? Her mouth opened, closed. She tried to pivot, saying it was taken out of context. I asked another. And was it also out of context when you wrote, "I'll fine them until they move or obey," regarding a disabled veteran who couldn't afford to repaint his fence? She didn't answer. I let the silence stretch. Let it crawl up the courtroom walls and nest in the jury box. By the time we reached closing arguments, it wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about karma. The jury didn't see a misunderstood civic leader. They saw a petty tyrant who used her position to line her pockets, stomp on her neighbors, and commit federal crimes with a wine glass in one hand and a violation slip in the other. The verdict took 27 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, unauthorized destruction of federal property, and a bonus count for bribery, courtesy of the real estate investor. She thought she was charming over coffee. The judge, a man known for his restraint, didn't hold back. He sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, calling her a community leader who weaponized her influence against the very people she was supposed to protect. Karen didn't cry. Not at first. She stood there, stunned, as if someone had unplugged her reality and replaced it with static. Then, as the bailiffs approached, she pulled one last stunt. She clutched her chest and gasped, collapsing in a dramatic heap like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Her lawyer jumped to his feet, shouting for medical attention. An EMT in the gallery rushed forward, checked her pulse, and whispered to the bailiff, "She's faking it." They hoisted her upright, and the judge added 3 months for contempt. Reporters swarmed the courthouse step. Neighbors snapped photos. One man from the community walked past me and said, "You're the guy with the truck, right? Thank you. We thought she'd never get what she deserved." I gave him a polite nod. But I wasn't done. Karen wasn't the only one who had her hands dirty, and the investigation into the remaining board members was still ongoing. But for now, the queen of the cul-de-sac had been dethroned in spectacular fashion. A woman who thought she could run a neighborhood like a monarchy now had a new address, a concrete cell with a steel door. And outside that courtroom, the world kept spinning. Just with a little less HOA tyranny on the schedule. The neighborhood felt different after the trial. Quieter, lighter, almost like the whole place had exhaled after holding its breath for years. For the first time since I moved in, people were smiling without suspicion. Lawn chairs were coming out onto front porches again. Kids were actually riding their bikes down the sidewalks without being chased off for noise violations. It was as if the entire community had been under some invisible cloud, and now that cloud had been hauled off in the back of a federal transport van. Karen's old office was boarded up within a week of the sentencing. Her name was stripped from every document, plaque, and file in the HOA system. Residents held an emergency election for new leadership, and to everyone's surprise, the turnout was nearly unanimous. They voted in a retired Marine named Hector, who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was first built. He'd kept to himself for the last few years, mostly because Karen had threatened to fine him for non-regulation mulch in his flower beds. Hector didn't say much, but when he took the stage after the vote, he only said one thing: no more nonsense. The changes came fast. The board held their meetings at convenient times. Financial records were posted publicly and clearly. Fines were reduced, and the rules were rewritten in plain language. Gone were the 17 pages of lawn height requirements and fence stain regulations. Instead, they focused on real issues: safety, shared spaces, and making the neighborhood feel like a community again instead of a prison with rose bushes. One of the first things the new board did was reach out to me. Hector called and asked if I'd be willing to attend a meeting, not to prosecute but to help. I was hesitant at first. I never wanted to be the center of this, but something told me it was the right thing to do. So I went. They asked me to explain how the old system had gotten so corrupt, how to spot red flags in financials, and how to set up checks and balances that couldn't be gamed by one manipulative person. I kept it simple: transparent budgeting, shared authority, mandatory audit, the basics. But it meant something to them. They were listening now. The residents wanted to do something symbolic too, something that acknowledged what had happened without letting it define them. That's when someone jokingly suggested they put up a little monument in front of the clubhouse. Just a small plaque or display to remind people that power can be abused, even in cul-de-sacs with white picket fences. The idea snowballed. Someone else suggested a sculpture. Another person brought up the surveillance truck. That got laughs, but the idea stuck. A week later, they asked if I still had the truck. I did. And it still ran just fine. They asked if I'd be willing to park it in front of the HOA office for a single weekend. A sort of tongue-in-cheek display for their first community picnic since Karen's reign. I agreed, as long as they didn't turn it into some weird tourist attraction. They promised it would be tasteful. And to their credit, it was. They cleaned the truck, polished the sides, and placed a little sign next to it that read, "The truck that towed down tyranny." It was ridiculous, and I laughed out loud when I saw it. But the residents loved it. They took pictures, shared stories, and toasted with lemonade and sparkling cider. There were kids playing tag on the grass and neighbors trading barbecue recipes. And through it all, the truck sat there, quiet and unassuming, just like it had before, except now it was a symbol of change. Then came the letters. Karen, ever the delusional monarch, began writing letters from prison. At first, they came once a month, then every 2 weeks. Typed, neatly formatted, signed with full name and title, Karen L. Whitmore, former HOA president. She sent them to the board, to residents, even to the local paper. They were full of self-pity, conspiracy theories, and increasingly bizarre accusations. According to her, the trial was a sham, the jury was rigged, and I was a secret government agent sent to destroy her because she knew too much. The new board decided to frame the first letter and hang it in the HOA office as a kind of cautionary artifact. The plaque underneath read, "Power is not a personality." It became a running joke in the neighborhood. Someone even made t-shirts. Life moved on. I was offered a promotion not long after. Regional prosecutor. Bigger office, more responsibility, more travel. It wasn't an easy decision. I'd grown strangely attached to the neighborhood, even after everything. But the work called, and I knew my time there had served its purpose. I'd cleaned up a mess I hadn't planned on stepping into, and in doing so, found a strange sense of closure. On my last day in the house, I stood in the driveway, watching the movers load the final boxes. Hector walked up with a small package. He handed it to me without a word, nodded, and walked off. I opened it later that night. Inside was the broken lock. The one Karen had cut to steal the truck. It had been mounted on a small wooden plaque with a tiny metal tag that read, "Thanks for the evidence." I laughed so hard I almost dropped it. That lock now sits on a shelf in my new office. A reminder that justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms. Sometimes it starts in a driveway, with a pair of bolt cutters and a woman who thinks she's untouchable. Sometimes it starts with a truck that looks like junk but holds the receipts to burn an empire down. And sometimes it ends with a neighborhood finally waking up, dusting itself off, and realizing that they never needed a queen, they just needed each other. The story might have started with a cut lock and a missing truck, But what really drove the whole thing wasn't the vehicle or even the crime. It was one simple truth that Karen never understood. People remember how you made them feel. And when you make them feel small, they'll wait for the day they can stand tall again. That day came, and they made damn sure she'd never forget it.